My mother-in-law was very clear that she did not welcome anyone into her home who did not want to help out around the house. She seemed to expect me to apologize, even feel a little regret. My spouse, meanwhile, was seated next to her, a faint smile spreading across his lips as though he enjoyed watching me chastised. Quite the opposite of what they would have anticipated, I experienced a sudden calm wave. After that, I'll head out, I said firmly and without hesitation. I made the decision at that point to stop worrying about their behavior and views. I realized that they would eventually have to face the consequences of their actions. Elizabeth is my name, and I'm 40 years old. I manage our home and a full-time career at the same time. The 3 adult children that my spouse Andrew and I have moved out to start their own lives. Originally, Andrew and I planned to spend this time together, but things changed when my mother-in-law moved in with us. She was widowed and in need of company. The calm dynamic that only Andrew and I shared at home was drastically changed by her arrival. Because of the rigorous nature of my work, I frequently have to stay at the office past 7:00 p.m. The scene that welcomes me home simply makes me feel more tired. There are frequently snacks and clothes all over the living room. Andrew, on the other hand, is barely recognizing my presence as he relaxes on the sofa with his beer and TV, seemingly unaware of the pandemonium around him. I'm left to take care of the kitchen chores alone because dinner isn't ready, and my dissatisfaction is getting worse by the minute. My mother-in-law frequently comes out of her room these evenings to chastise me, saying that my late nights and business travels are no justification for shirking my responsibilities at home. She calls me out for not being a good housewife and twists every little thing into a personal attack on my personality. I eventually discovered that reacting or attempting to defend myself just makes things worse. I've discovered that it's better to listen to her and wait for her to cool off. Even though it's far from perfect, this strategy keeps the peace, at least for the time being, and stops more arguments. I consider her critiques for a time before turning my focus back to making dinner. Her remarks hurt, but I keep going because I know she'll stop eventually. The response from my spouse, though, is more difficult to put up with. It appears that he enjoys witnessing my mother-in-law chastise me. Wives ought to value their spouses. She says, "You lack charm," a lot. And my husband laughs, echoing her, making fun of me while I lie at the dinner table. Not only is she the target of my wrath, but my husband's attitude is also getting to me. I beg them all the time to start supper without me, but they never do when I'm running late for work. They wait impassively for me to treat them like a servant when I eventually make it home. Since my mother-in-law moved in with us, things have gotten much worse in our house. My husband was a true partner before she came, helping out around the house, preparing meals when I was running late, and taking an active role in raising our children. However, he has since completely ceased helping and joined my mother-in-law in her criticisms. It's perplexing as well as annoying. She calls me inept and lazy, but she is the one who depends on us. Despite receiving money from her late spouse, she hasn't contributed monetarily. Instead, she wasted it on pleasures, quickly depleting her savings and even accruing debt. She resides with us almost rent-free these days. We had this conflict from the moment we moved in together. She said she would be thoughtful and even bowed low to demonstrate her sincerity. But only one day later she went back to her old habits and blamed me for not doing the cleaning. Her abrupt change was almost comical at first, but it soon became serious. She criticized not only my housekeeping, but also my professional responsibilities, calling me a bad wife for putting so much emphasis on my career. I attempted to clarify that occasionally my work requires late hours, but it didn't seem to register. I tried to explain, but my mother-in-law would not listen. Rather, as though it would be more appropriate, she recommended that I take a part-time work at the neighborhood grocery store. She was unaware of the practicalities of my profession, but she had a predetermined notion of what a daughter-in-law ought to be like. Living with her became increasingly challenging. Any dissatisfaction she had, like with our meal choices, would lead to complaints. Even simple routines like breakfast turned into issues. We used to grab bread or buy lunch, but she disapproved of these habits. Reluctantly, she started following our household rules, but not without constant grumbling. Dinner time became the focal point of contention. She insisted that it be served promptly at 7:00 p.m. with at least 3 side dishes and demanded that everyone eat together. She claimed this was what normal families did, but my work often kept me well past 7:00 p.m., making her demands impractical. Her rigid expectations clashed with the reality of my professional obligations, which were essential for our financial stability. She expressed doubts about my job's necessity, implying that my husband Andrew's salary ought to be adequate and that my work was more motivated by personal preference than by a need for money. I turned to Andrew for consolation, but he waved me off, saying I would finally learn my lesson. My fury was only heightened by his lack of defense. It appeared that he was comfortable portraying the empathetic, uncaring spouse who was unable to assist with home duties. This behavior infuriated me even more, because he immediately linked himself with my mother-in-law upon moving in, rather than standing by me. Since then, it seems like they are working together to treat me unfairly. My mother-in-law would always interrupt me when I tried to get Andrew to help with the housekeeping, saying that was the wife's job, and Andrew never questioned her. I was perplexed by this shift in dynamics because we used to work well together. After a while, I began to see a pattern. Andrew would smirk every time his mother gave me a hard time. I realized that maybe he didn't like that I made more money than he did, and that was why he could have been reluctant to help out around the house. I started to wonder about a lot of things in our relationship and how much had changed since his mother moved in with us when I came to this realization. Since he is typically viewed as the family provider, Andrew is unable to express his dissatisfaction, but I have a suspicion that he has been enjoying the arrangement from the start. After my mother-in-law came in, she publicly questioned if Andrew was actually the head of the family and regularly criticized my role in the home. When I was reprimanded, this seemed to give him a certain kind of satisfaction, exposing a part of my husband that I hadn't completely acknowledged before. After we moved in together, even after all these years, I had many nervous days wondering what to do. The mood had changed from one of peace to one of perpetual anxiety. My mother-in-law was a constant source of trouble, and Andrew was showing himself to be untrustworthy. Before she came, I hadn't felt the need to make any drastic decisions. One day, while I was out shopping, a neighbor approached me with a remark that caught me off guard. She suggested I should be more considerate towards my mother-in-law. Surprised, I asked her to elaborate. She confessed that she wasn't fond of her mother-in-law, but didn't consider herself inconsiderate. Then she revealed something unsettling. My mother-in-law had been talking about me. According to her, I neglected all housework. Our home was always a mess, and laundry was perpetually piled up. She claimed her rheumatism was worsening because she had to do chores herself since her son Andrew returned home late. Hearing how I was being portrayed was shocking, as a neglectful wife who relied on bread for every meal, leaving my mother-in-law to lament and complain. This narrative had begun to affect how people in our neighborhood viewed me. it became clear that the cold, less friendly reactions I was receiving were due to the stories my mother-in-law was spreading. Despite her small, frail appearance, she knew how to elicit sympathy from others, painting herself as a victim of a lazy daughter-in-law who shirked all household responsibilities. The neighbor's look was one of cold accusation, reflecting the impact of these harmful tales. Feeling a deep sense of embarrassment that our family issues had become neighborhood gossip, I murmured a denial and quickly returned home. As I entered the living room, I found my mother-in-law absorbed in her TV show, snacking away. "Please stop spreading rumors," I urged firmly. To my dismay, she just laughed and insisted, "But it's true." Something inside me reached its breaking point. If she was determined to persist in her falsehoods, then I would no longer uphold the pretense of a dutiful daughter-in-law. The very next day, after returning from work, I was met with the usual demands for dinner this time. However, I bypassed my husband and mother-in-law's complaints, went straight to the kitchen, and prepared just a single serving of instant ramen for myself. Seeing this, my mother-in-law's face turned a shade of crimson, her protest growing louder. "So you're just proving you're the worst daughter-in-law? Not doing any housework, huh? Fine, if that's the way you want to be," she declared angrily. As I quietly enjoyed my noodles, she was left speechless, eventually turning to my husband seeking his support. When he approached me, I laid out the whole situation. "Mom's been telling everyone that I'm a terrible daughter-in-law who neglects the housework." When I confronted her, she doubled down on her claims. "So I've decided to just stop doing it altogether. I'm only doing what she's been telling everyone." I shared the encounter with the neighbor from the previous day. My husband, looking concerned, tried to mediate. "Mom probably just exaggerated. Don't be so stubborn," he suggested. Despite his mother clearly being in the wrong, he still sided with her. Exhausted, and without the energy to argue further, I discarded the empty ramen cup, ignored his pleas, and retreated to the bathroom. There, I did my laundry and took a bath in solitude. As I soaked, a wave of relief washed over me. It became clear that regardless of my efforts, I was always going to be labeled as the bad wife. From that moment on, I decided to stop engaging in the household tasks my mother-in-law complained about. She bemoaned the lack of freshly baked bread for breakfast on my days off, but I remained steadfast in my new resolve. When I woke up and stepped into the living room, my mother-in-law demanded that I go out and buy bread immediately. In response, I retorted, "Why don't you buy it yourself? I'm such a bad wife. I'll only buy my share from now on. You'll need to pay for your food or handle it yourself." With that, I ignored her protests, made myself coffee, and quickly ate my bread. As I watched her reaction, a part of me worried that I might have been too harsh, but considering all I had endured, it felt justified. After finishing my breakfast, I tidied only my part of the cluttered living room and settled down with a book. The calm was soon interrupted by the doorbell. Glancing at the monitor, I saw a group of more than 4 elderly people, all familiar faces, standing there with visibly upset expressions. Confused, I watched as my mother-in-law rushed to greet them. They filed in one after the other, and I was taken aback when one of them berated me. "I hear you're the wicked woman who doesn't even care for her mother-in-law." These visitors were my mother-in-law's siblings and their spouses. She had spread false tales of mistreatment, accusing me of not feeding her properly and not allowing her to bathe, pleading for their intervention. Being the youngest of 4 with 3 elder siblings, she had a significant support network. Now, with spouses included, There were 8 elderly people in my living room labeling me as some kind of demon wife deserving of retribution. Their accusations made me break out in a cold sweat from fear. "This is a misunderstanding," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. But then the eldest brother raised his voice, pounded his cane on the floor, and yelled, "Stop making excuses." The others joined him, demanding that I apologize and reflect on my supposed misdeed. Just then, my husband arrived, drawn by the noise. When my mother-in-law's brother turned to criticize my upbringing, my husband didn't defend me. Instead, he joined in the criticism, adding to the chorus of voices against me. My affection for him vanished in that instant. I had always believed my husband was a kind person until we began living with my mother-in-law. It became clear that he wasn't kind. He was just weak, easily influenced by those around him, and unable to withstand any form of pressure. During a heated discussion, one of my mother-in-law's brothers took my husband's criticisms to heart and suggested a divorce. To my dismay, everyone seemed to agree. My mother-in-law then offered me a so-called second chance, provided I promised to change and better serve her and my husband in the future. Trying to hold back tears, her siblings urged me to be grateful, claiming I would never find a kinder mother-in-law elsewhere. They even decided to implement a rotating schedule, taking turns each week to check whether I was keeping up with the household chores and attending to my mother-in-law and husband's needs adequately. Once their plans were set, everyone appeared content and decided to celebrate their reunion with a sushi outing. Leaving the house together, as they departed, my mother-in-law couldn't resist a parting shot, instructing me to ensure the house was clean and the laundry done by the time they returned. I was left to wonder how things had escalated to this point. Alone in the cluttered living room, tears began to well up. Our marriage had been happy until my mother-in-law's intrusion. Now, I found myself the subject of complaints from all the relatives despite doing my best. Tears streamed down my face, a mix of sadness, regret, and anger. A few hours later, my husband and mother-in-law came back. I was still sitting in the disarrayed living room. My mother-in-law smirked at me, her words sharp with disdain. "Leave. We don't need a wife who can't do housework. I told you to clean up earlier, didn't I?" Seemingly tipsy, she demanded that I leave immediately. My husband, with a grin on his face, joined in, thinking his support would ensure I complied. Quietly, I had reached my limit and no longer had the desire to exert myself for them. "Fine, I'll leave then," I said calmly as I stood to exit. In the living room behind me, I heard my mother-in-law and husband laughing, probably thinking I was just bluffing. But their reactions didn't matter to me anymore. I went to my room, packed my things, and left the house without another word. About a week later, my mother-in-law called me in a panic. "Andrew says he has no money." "What does that mean?" she asked frantically. I responded with the stark truth. "Andrew earns only a third of what I do. I've been covering most of our expenses, and the house is in my name. I'm planning to sell it, so you'll need to leave soon." She thought I was joking until I urged her to check the bank statements in her drawer. There was silence on the other end of the phone as the reality of the situation set in. Then the pleading began. She apologized, said Andrew was lonely, and begged me to come back. But I was determined, so I told her that I was going to file for divorce through my attorney. I ignored her heartfelt apologies and ended the phone. I filed for divorce with legal aid, citing my mother-in-law's intolerable behavior and my husband's lack of support as justifications. The divorce was approved quickly, and I even got a little payout. My children were understanding when I told them about the circumstances, and they agreed that my husband and his mother were solely to blame. My ex-husband and his mother were obliged to move out after the divorce and temporarily stay with relatives when I sold the house. Their time there was brief, since they soon had to move into a tiny apartment as they struggled to make ends meet on his meager salary. They now spend their days blaming each other for their misfortunes, from what I've heard. In the meantime, my spouse has been messaging constantly, requesting a reconciliation and asserting that he no longer has any relationship with his mother. But these communications are more of a bother than anything, so in order to keep my peace, I'm thinking of banning him. I feel freed and prepared to live my life on my terms, putting my personal fulfillment and well-being first, without their unceasing criticism